Welcome back to the Single Dads Online Podcast, Online Dad, and I am the Online Dad. Well, it is March. The weather is starting to get warmer, which means spring is really trying to take over from the winter as the grass starts to get a little greener. The snow is all but gone, and hopefully, at least in the Midwest, there are no more snowstorms on our horizon. But spring is also time for new beginnings. But within those new beginnings at springtime, I can't help but acknowledge that the grief process is still something we as single dads especially, but as parents in general, tend to neglect that process. I've presented workshops and written articles on the grief process over the many years. And in the aftermath of the continuation of COVID-19, the grief process is just as important now as it has always been. You still may find grief or grieving a form of weakness, blame, and vulnerability. Grieving is time-consuming, and it doesn't stop you from moving forward, but choosing not to grieve will stop you from moving forward. Grieving is a natural part of loss, especially when that loss is close to the heart. Unfortunately, despite all the brain research, the books, the experts telling us that grief is a natural process and it has to happen, we must work through our grief. Most still just want this quick fix via a pill, simple denial, or be told, hey, within a month you're going to be fine. Today's society does not allow for proper grieving. Keep in mind, even if the loss is under the best of circumstances, it's still a loss of a way of life, a known security, support system, and change, which all humans are resistant. We are creatures of habit. And somebody said, change is inevitable, but growth is optional. And in order to get to that growth part with the change, especially during a traumatic loss, you have to work through the grieving process. In the last podcasts that I've done like the different stages of grief and how to recognize them. This podcast, I want to just focus on the importance of the grieving process in general. When we lose somebody close to us that is older, a grandparent, an aunt, or an uncle, and they pass away, we as parents seem to be a little more tolerant of that grieving process for not only ourselves, but our children as a natural progression of life, and tend to be more supportive and patient for the grieving, not only for yourself, but also your children. However, if that emotional trauma is due to a more direct loss, such as a divorce, telling their children they've been adopted, or their spouse has died suddenly, or passed away from COVID-19, parents tend to feel that their children's grief is a negative reflection on us, the parents, for their child's pain and heartache. And often parents will deny their child's pain if they see them outside laughing and playing and carrying on and doing their sports like nothing is wrong, and/or parents choose to preoccupy them with distractions, gifts, activities, vacations. That refusal to admit that their child's heart is hurting and broken, kind of like an out of sight, out of mind mentality. There is nothing wrong with distractions and gifts and activities, but it's not a permanent substitute for the avoidance of grief. Even to, sign your children up for every sport on the planet, so every day of the week they're doing something, is still a form of avoidance. Their children may like doing it, but you're just denying the inevitable. So once all the sports are done, or they lose interest in the sports, or they don't want to do them anymore, or they're sitting in a classroom or sitting in the room, that's when it all starts to bubble up again. When you pretend nothing is wrong and you dismiss their pain or tell your children, hey, that's life, you need to move on, I've moved on, there's nothing we can do about it, just get over it, doesn't help to work through the grief any faster. You would never deny your children their medication to keep them healthy, so why deny your children and yourself the ability to grieve? To allow grieving also keeps you and your children healthy, not only physically, mentally, and emotionally. Brain research, which continues, but brain research has proven that if you are not healthy emotionally, you are not going to be healthy physically and mentally. As you know, children lack those experience and tools to work through what they're feeling. Okay, we were all there. Even if they know others that have gone through similar circumstances, Like adults, no one feels their pain like they do because their pain is unique and personal. Think about the pain you felt when you lost someone close to you, or even when your divorce was final or your spouse had passed away. You're an adult, you have life experiences, you know other people have gone through it, yet your pain made you feel helpless, vulnerable, or like a child all over again. If you, the parents, have those feelings, imagine how your children feel, who have little or no life experiences to go through to help them work through their emotions and cope. Regardless of why the loss occurred, the blame and guilt cannot consume you, the parent, to the point of long-term denial for yourself, your children, nor can you simply feel that a few months of grieving or a short-term support system is all you need. The deeper the loss, the longer it will take to grieve. It's never easy to ask your children how they feel about their parents no longer being together or their mom or dad not being around. Even if you did ask them and they said they're fine, they shrugged their shoulders, they're distracted, they're on their phone, doesn't mean they're okay with it. Because we all get this. When we go to the dentist or we go to the doctor and we know we're getting a shot or we know we're going to get stick with a needle or we know whatever they're going to do is going to hurt, we're going to do whatever it takes to minimize that pain so we don't have to go through it. Does it hurt? No, not really. It's okay. And we do that. And we all do that. We know something's going to hurt and we know it's coming. We do everything we can to deny to do it until we have no choice but to get it taken care of. So, children, when grief, it's the same way. We do everything and look for every indication that everything is moving forward and everything is being fine. And in reality, it's not there yet. When you experience that emotional or traumatic loss, the reality doesn't really hit you or your children until 6 months, sometimes even a year after it happened. This usually coincides with family and friends that stop coming around on a regular basis to give support or cook a meal or help you and the family on a move to a new home or to a new state. It's kind of when normalcy starts to return. That's when you start seeing the feelings bubble up. You also start see feelings starting to bubble up when there is a milestone, especially within your children's lives. They're getting ready to graduate. There's a big sporting event coming up. They're in the school play, the school recital, whatever it is, tends to bring it back up. And even if you have been working through the grieving process with your kids when they were younger, when you hit those young adolescent, young adult years, those milestones tend to bring the grief back up a little bit because now they're looking and thinking of it from a different perspective. And as a parent, you have to be ready to discuss it no matter how many years go by because you just don't know when some of that pain is going to come back up and create new questions or new problems. My mom passed away almost 9 years ago, as an adult, passed away 9 years ago. And there are still things that happen periodically that bring everything back up again on how much I miss her and, not wanting to lose her. I lost her to pancreatic cancer at a young age at 67. And it's just one of those things where you just don't expect to happen. And there are still things now that still pop up that make me think about it or wish that she was here or miss her deeply. So with your children, it's the same thing. You just need to understand how much time it takes to grieve is truly unknown. Simply understand, can't put a time limit on it. And I know in some religious cultures there is a time limit. You got a month, you got a couple of weeks, you got 6 months, you even got a year. But you can't say, okay, statistically or our faith believes we can only grieve this long. You can't put a time limit on it. Part of raising your children is teaching them to cope through life's bumps in the roads. And those bumps may have been caused by us. And we must be prepared to help them cope with those also. Choosing to do nothing and denying the pain will simply cause greater issues and perhaps greater heartache for you and your children. I know if a speeding bus was coming towards your child in the street, you would do everything in your power to rescue your child from that speeding bus so they don't get hit. Unresolved grief is that speeding bus. So what I want to do to sum up this podcast today is I want to help you and your children start the grieving process in a healthy manner and to consider some basic steps. Now remember, these steps, every family's different, every dynamic is different. So these steps in here are a jumping off place. You can do them chronologically, you can do them in different orders, but with these different steps and these different suggestions, it's not the end all and be all, because everybody's loss, even though it might be similar to somebody's, is still unique to the family. And I don't know your family dynamic. And remember, a lot of this stuff that I'm bringing up to you now is because I screwed it up when I was being a parent. And what I'm trying to do is help minimize those mistakes as a parent to kind of get you off on a better foot. When you want to talk to your children about anything, but especially about grieving and how they're feeling about what's going on, all the technology needs to be put away. And what I mean by that, it either goes silent or off. No distractions. I don't want flashing lights, vibrating, especially if you put it on a table and it starts to flop on the table because it's vibrating. They need to be put on silent or off and put somewhere else where they can't see it or look down at it or anything. I know today it's like second nature to keep the phone handy and in your pocket, even as adults. But you know what, dads and moms? When you have your technology handy, it sends the wrong message about the discussion. It's important for them to put their technology away so you can have this discussion, but it's not that important that you can be distracted. If it's something related to work and it's something you have to have at your side, I get it. I understand it. But you've got to keep in mind the priorities. Right now, it's your children's feelings and your family's growth to work through this. Put it away. If it is a possibility you may be called into work or there might be an emergency that might pop up, consider delaying that discussion to a time where there is no distractions. After that distractions are all put away, you need to acknowledge the loss and validate their feelings. And most times, that starts with you sharing your feelings, keeping in mind everything is age appropriate. Information you give them, how you talk about it needs to be age appropriate. But a lot of times if you just ask them off the bat, how's everything? Fine. How do you think about mom or dad not being together anymore, or mom or dad passing away? Fine. Whatever it is, there's nothing we can do about it. We just need to move on. Sometimes you need to start with yourself. And also, side note, you might want to have a box of Kleenex nearby because crying is okay and it's healthy. Make time to discuss their world and the impact that loss is making on them. I know it's very easy to say, well, I got to work and I got bills to pay and I have to keep moving. It's not about you right now. It's about them and how we as a family work together to work through their pain. So it's their world, especially if you have adolescent children. It's about their world anyway. So just keep in mind, it's about them, it's not about you. Don't set a time limit for these discussions and make sure you facilitate the discussions. Don't run it, guide it. Work through it together, but don't tell them how they think you should feel. Just facilitate the discussion. And it may go in multiple directions, and as a facilitator, you can redirect it back to that one thing that's being discussed. Because with emotional loss, there are tons of things out there that kind of fit into loss and what they're going through. So, and it's going to be impossible to have that hodgepodge of discussion. So try and facilitate it into one piece of it, because you can always go back and talk about the next piece later. If you have to stop the discussion, gone an hour, gone 2 hours, something has truly come up, somebody's pounding on your door, try to end it on an upbeat note and the promise to continue. Right? And sometimes that upbeat note is just simply a hug to tell them you love them and we're going to get through this together. But just don't end it and say, got time to go to a game or practice, or I've got to take this call, or it's been 2 hours or 3 hours, and you can see the fatigue starting to set in. Just end it on an upbeat note, and again, just something as simple as saying, hug them, I love you, we will get through this together. Reassure them that you're going to be there every step of the way. And I'm not just talking about having these little discussions at the table or on the floor. Just every time something pops up, you need to reassure them every step of the way that you're going to be there to support them. And I can tell you right now, it may not be perfectly. They may throw back in your face that they really want to do something and you don't want them to do it, or you can't afford to do it, and they'll throw that in your face. Well, you said you would help me every step of the way. you got to understand with grief, there's anger. And with anger, it's misplaced. And again, with teenagers who are making it all about them, it's something they want, and they're going to try and spin it. So just when you say, reassure, I'm going to help you in a step of the way, doesn't mean that you continue to parent by guilt. Understand your children's time to talk may not be convenient. They may very well wake you up at night to talk while you're sound asleep. Might be the middle of the night. Okay, you got to get those sleepers out of your eyes, turn on the light, and listen to what they have to say. Okay, and again, facilitate. You're not necessarily controlling the narrative, but how the discussion is going to continue to move forward to where you can get at a stopping place where they feel comforted enough that they can go back to bed. They may do very little talking, but remember your children are always listening and they're always watching. If you need to, consider counseling or peer support group for your children. Sometimes it goes beyond our abilities because we lack the tools ourselves. If you're able to afford counseling, great. Peer support tends to work better with children because think about it. When we were children, we'd always talk to our friends before we talked to our parents in most cases. Same thing with peer support groups. You're talking to a peer set of group that are going through a similar situation, and that may also help them work through their loss because they're now talking to other children, and all of a sudden they realize how much they really have in common. One such organization, which is free to the kids and free to the families, is called Rainbows for All Children. www.rainbows.org is just one form of peer support that's out there. Parent your children consistently with appropriate boundaries. Yes, this is part of grieving and working through the grieving process as well. We are exhausted. We're emotionally and physically exhausted, and sometimes we just don't have it in us to say no. Or they're going through a lot, so I'm going to let them do it. Now, as an adult, let's be realistic with this statement. Okay, when I'm saying about boundaries, children must have bedtimes and they must have structure in their lives. Children crave that. They need that, whether they say they do or not. And then on occasionally letting them stay out past curfew or occasionally letting them do something they want or treat them to something special, that's not necessarily letting the boundaries go. You're still in control. You're making the choice to have it done or to let it happen. But if you solely parent out of guilt on a day-to-day basis, can have negative long-term effects on your children. Let me give an example with my child. So my father had passed away 2002, really struggling with what was going on with my world at that time. And I was asked by my child, can I get my ear pierced? Now, he'd asked me before, and I said, absolutely not. When you're 18, pierce whatever you want. But right now, no. And he brought it up again. And at that time, I kind of had a perspective moment because he was only talking about an ear piercing, nothing in the nose or anything else that was a little more dramatic. So I put it in perspective, given the fact my father just passed away, and in the grand scheme of life, a pierced ear, if he doesn't want it anymore, he can take it out and it'll close up. Okay, that's fine. That's not necessarily parenting out of guilt. If anything, it was a kind of a parenting out of perspective, perhaps. But when you parent out of guilt on a long-term basis, those negative effects, it's not going to be good. Because then when you start to put your foot down and you're saying, I'm done, you're not doing this, but everything up to that point you've let them do, it's going to be a lot harder to be in control. It's a lot harder to parent when you've allowed yourself to let them do what they want out of guilt. Also remember, feelings are neither good nor bad. They just are. It's how the feelings are expressed that you need to monitor. It's okay to be angry because mom or dad has passed away. It's okay to be angry your parents are divorced and you have to move, or money's a little tight, or you have to change schools, or whatever that is. It's okay. But if they start getting into fights and they start self-mutilating, or they're breaking things, or they're putting their fists through a wall, that's what you need to monitor. Not so much that they're angry, but how they're expressing that. Not being able to sleep on occasion is okay because they're feeling sad or what they're going through. But, flat out insomnia where they're up all night, that, again, those are things that need to be monitored, how they're expressing their feelings, not so much that they're going through their feelings. Your children need to verbally express themselves, and they simply may not know how. Again, the younger your children, the harder this may be. Listen more than give a reason or excuse. Be empathetic. Don't be sympathetic. Don't try and spin it towards, well, I've got it worse than you. Just listen, and even if they're lashing out at you or angry at you or your spouse for what's going on in their world, just listen and let them express it. Be empathetic. All right? Pity and sympathy, more often than not, won't work, especially with adolescents. They can see right through it. Conversations with the younger children may be limited, and you might need to ask them to draw what they're thinking and feeling while they explain it to you as best as they can. Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. You've all heard that phrase before. And with your children trying to express how they're thinking or feeling, sometimes that picture they draw is going to tell you a whole lot more than them trying to explain how they're thinking or feeling. Tell them each night you love them and reassure them that you're in this together. And even if your children are not living with you, call them on the phone, text them, whatever you need to do to reassure them that every night you love them. And it's not that they don't know you love them, but it's always nice to hear. Your children know that you love them. There's no doubt about it. But when you make the effort to say it, whether, like I said, especially dads, if your children are not living with you or they're not with you at that time, and they have cell phones and they're old enough to have cell phones, text them, hey, good night, I love you, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And you're going to know the dynamic with your own children, how often you should call or talk to them. But I'm going to say, especially if the loss is new, just reassuring them each night that you're there for them. And if you need to call, I'm there. And with older children, yeah, Dad, I know you've said it. I remember my child telling me, Dad, you don't need to tell me you love me. I know you love me. I said, well, then you need to at least let me tell you once a day. How about every other day? Your family dynamic is all on your own, and you will figure that out. The point of the statement is reassurance that you're always going to be there for them. Parenting in general is never easy. And then you add an emotional trauma, death, divorce, the pandemic, deployment, incarceration, deportation, makes parenting just that much more difficult. Anything worth doing is hard work. And regardless of how hard parenting is or becomes, your children are counting on you. When tackling grief, try to break it down into segments or chunks. Sometimes looking at the grief long term, especially when you have people say, hey, this is going to be years, wow, that can be overwhelming, especially because you're barely getting through the day. Breaking it down or chunking it into sections, the process may not make it easier, but it's going to make it more manageable. And again, it comes down to those facilitating skills when you're talking to your children. Sometimes through just a generic conversation with your child, says, oh, okay, that might be the next topic we have a discussion about because of something they said or something that was done. That might make that for the next section. I remember when I was a teenager, my parents divorced when I was 10, and then I came home with a T-shirt that my mom saw me wear, and it said, life's a bitch and then you die. And she told me later as an adult that T-shirt spoke volumes to her and knew that there was more work to do with discussing about my parents being divorced. So sometimes they give you a little signal of what they're going through that might even help you saying, okay, this is our next discussion. How do I weave this into the dinner table discussion? Sometimes the best time to have those discussions is at the dinner table. And I know the dynamic, especially in the United States now, to sit down and have a family meal is very difficult. But I would say you've got to make one day, because sometimes that family meal does more than just help you talk about the grief process. But that family meal also gives you a dynamic where the family's having a discussion over breaking bread of what's going on in the world and what's going on in their lives. Because when you're going 360, a mile a minute, day-to-day lives, and, how's things going? Everything okay with you? Yeah, everything's fine. Sometimes it's not. And because everything is crazy, you've got to make that time. Whether that's you order a pizza or you make dinner together and set the table. Make the time. Again, no distractions. So I'm going to wrap this up for now. Just understand that when you are grieving, you're not grieving alone, and your children are not grieving alone. But grieving is necessary, it's normal, and it's healthy. So remember, your children love you unconditionally. You are incredible dads. You are incredible parents. And together, you guys will work through this grieving process. Check out my website, www.singledadsonline.org, and put any comments in, email me or comments in the articles of things that you have tried that have worked for you in helping work through the grieving process, or if you simply have a question. So have a great rest of the day. Enjoy spring, and we'll talk to you soon.